speaking about the spurt in demand before the festive season and during the festive season as well. The resumption of demand in the Indian economy has been a crucial factor in determining whether we're well on the way to recovery or not, because we are a consumer-driven economy. But is there a fly in the ointment? Anecdotally, from the last 3 to 4 weeks, we're hearing from various sectors and more companies that rural demand may be showing some signs of sluggishness. Today, there was a report which quoted FADA, the dealer authority or the dealer association for vehicles, that says two-wheeler and lower-end passenger vehicle demand has been sluggish, and of course this festive season has been very bad for dealers and the auto industry, though that's in a large part because of a shortage of semiconductors and other supply issues. Likewise, we have seen through these FMCG companies' quarterly results, a lot of them are bullish on rural demand going forward, but many of them do admit that it has moderated. So what exactly are we seeing? Are we seeing a breather from rural demand as urban demand returns? And what is the clear picture? To get a better sense, I'm joined today by Aditi Nayar, she's Chief Economist at ICRA, K. Ramakrishnan, Managing Director South Asia at Kantar, and Mayank Shah, Category Head, Parle Products, is with us on the show. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on the India Development Debate. Aditi, let me begin by getting your take. What is the data showing us, and is it still too early to determine a trend coming in from rural demand?
Thanks, Tamanna. So I think there's like a few different things that we need to look at to really be able to piece together the picture. First of all, we have to look at the fact that last year there was a massive amount of reverse migration that had happened to the villages, and that pushed up demand, particularly at the bottom of the pyramid in the rural areas. And what we're seeing now is a base effect related to that. So there's a little bit of a base which is really built into the fact that rural demand is possibly now not growing as fast as urban demand, and in some cases maybe even trailing the urban demand figures. Secondly, we had an extremely uneven monsoon this time. Frankly, I was surprised when we saw the first advanced estimates of crop production from the Ministry of Agriculture a couple of months back. I had, prior to seeing those advanced estimates, expected a more muted growth in the Kharif output. And we had, in fact, revised our agri growth figures for Q2 and Q3 up after seeing the first advanced estimates. But even after those came out, we had a delayed withdrawal of the monsoon. We've had surplus monsoon in September and in October. And there's possibly been some pockets of crop loss which are going to meaningfully affect demand. Lastly, I just at this point, want to flag one more issue. The second wave of COVID-19 did have a lot more depth. So as far as festive demand is concerned for big ticket items, we probably are going to end up with a very divergent picture. Some families would have celebrated a return to near normalcy, but a lot of families didn't celebrate Diwali this year because they lost a loved one. And therefore, the festive season itself may not be a bellwether of the overall strength of consumption and sentiment in India right now.
No, absolutely. So we're not just, yeah, you're right. We can't really talk only about festive season. And another trend really is the divergence. So, for example, the auto sector reports that compact SUVs and luxury cars are selling. Real estate says their big apartments are selling. Even their 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, luxury apartments are selling. So on and so forth. You've seen premium categories zoom ahead. Mayank, are you seeing that as well? Premium categories taking center stage, but on the other hand, a slower growth, a more moderated growth in rural areas?
See, technically it would not be right to strictly compare rural and urban growths at this stage. And a major reason for that is that if you look at the last year, because, growths typically are compared against, similar period last year, we're not talking here about quarter-on-quarter growth. But if you're talking about strictly, growth over last year, then urban was affected a lot last year during COVID, whereas rural was not so much affected. And as a result of that, rural grew very well. In fact, rural was the saving grace in last year. So while urban grew, rural was growing at much higher pace.
Yes.
Now, over that higher base, we are seeing a lower growth. So I would rather say, growth has moderated a bit for rural, but that should ideally be not a cause of concern, because that growth is over a very high base or a higher growth in last year as well, which is not the case with urban. What has happened in last 6 months is, with the pace of vaccination, picking up, and with more than, let's say, India, vaccinating more than a billion people, or a billion plus doses being, administrated, people are far more confident. Consumers are far more confident. In fact, with this festive time, this provided a perfect opportunity, an ideal opportunity for them to go out with most people being vaccinated, or such high quantum of vaccination. And secondly, with the kind of last 1.5 year experience that they had, where they were confined mostly to their homes, this festive season, to our mind, provided ideal opportunity for them to go out and splurge. And that's what we saw. So urban centers were the ones which were driving growth. If we are talking about last 1 quarter, 4 months, 5 months kind of thing, post second lockdown, I would say, post July onwards, we have started seeing demand recovery, and in fact, I would say robust demand coming in from urban.
So I get your point. Mayank, quick follow up. I get your point. You're saying that since rural grew last year better, it's on a higher base. That's why you're seeing growth being moderated. So forget about last year. If I skip to a year before that, and look at the pre-pandemic year, compared to that, do you see a robust clip from rural India, and is that sustaining?
Yeah. So if I talk about growth for 2019, then the growth of rural is still a little higher than that of urban. I mean, with current urban growth, if I'm talking about current volumes over what was there pre-COVID, urban probably is growing, by about 13 to 14%, whereas rural is growing, I'm talking about compared to 2019, at about 15 to 16%. Now, it still is a little higher if we consider 2-year period compared to 2019. However, the urban growth may take over, if we continue. I think there is a little bit of, revenge shopping also that's happening post the second wave, which is responsible for the robust growth that we are seeing in urban India.
Yeah. Mr. Ramakrishnan, data that Kantar has recently released underlines some of these points, that rural growth is, the pace of growth has moderated and urban has recovered. But is there any insight into the divergence, what I mentioned earlier, where high price, high value, high ticket items are going much faster than entry level and lower end items? Are you seeing any of that?
Yeah, so the report that you're referring to is very specific to FMCG. Right, when you look at FMCG, I think, like Mayank rightly said, the comparison is with an unnatural year. 2020 is really not the right year for you to say we are growing on top of that or not growing on top of that. We look at, our reports look at a lens of what comes into a household in terms of consumption, and not in terms of what gets sold by a company to its distributors or what goes off a retailer's shelf, but what comes into a household. So when you look at what comes into a household, 2020 was a very, very high year in terms of people consuming a lot. Because of the fact that they were not going out, they consumed a lot and stuff was coming inside their homes. And there was, to an extent, some level of, what shall I say, safe hoarding in terms of staples and things like that. So on that strong base, if you look at growth this year, it might look a little muted. But that said, I think we need to look at it from two lenses. One is the volume lens and second is the value lens, right? Value lens, most FMCG companies are actually calling out growths in the last quarter. But fundamentally, that's more from price increases and things like that. But if you purely look at volume, there is growth, but it's a muted growth, both in urban as well as rural. And because of the fact that we are talking about a huge base in the last year, that growth is looking a little muted. But if you purely look at fundamentals of what can go right in rural, I think fundamentals still remain strong. The rural story is still very much valid. Whether you compare with 2018 or 2019, definitely the rural growth story is still valid, and there's plenty of growth to be milked from rural even today.
Aditi, let me move to the other factor that we've not yet discussed but may going ahead have an impact on demand, which is your inflationary pressures and your higher input costs. Do you think those will now begin to weigh down?
See, certainly what we've seen in the last few months is that a lot of companies have, but many companies haven't actually pushed through the input price increases that they've experienced since the summer. And we've had a mixed bag so far. All I want to say is that at least the excise and VAT cards have come at a very good time because they're going to help to offset some of the other pressures that companies would otherwise pass through as demand shows more signs of becoming resilient. So in terms of the inflationary impact, we've at least got some offsetting. What we've been saying the last couple of months is that global commodity prices, logistics costs, these are not things which we have control over. But what we did have control over is our fuel taxes, and those have been cut at a very opportune time. So looking ahead from an economist point of view, if I talk about inflation, we are now expecting at least a 30 to 35 basis points reduction in the November CPI inflation simply from the excise duty cut by the central government. And the state government VAT cut will be an additional, reduction on top of what I just said. And we get a sub 4% number for both October and November. After that, as the base effect goes away, we are expecting now to see CPI inflation readings which may range between 5 to 6%, but we certainly don't expect CPI inflation to now cross 6% in the remainder of this fiscal year. So from the MPC point of view, this is all good news as far as household budgets are concerned. At least they've got one big sort of relief from the excise and the VAT cuts. But going ahead, there will be price increases that some companies may have to take because of the mix of their input cost increases. Everybody will not be able to hold on to margins, and consumers will have to be prepared for that.
So that's an important point, because a lot of companies we spoke to pre the festive period as well said that they were just waiting for this period to end before passing on the prices. Mr. Ramakrishnan, do you foresee any impact of higher prices? And I'm not talking about the headline inflation numbers, because sometimes the inflation that households suffer is a very different beast. But do you see an impact on consumption going forward as prices and price hikes are passed on?
So if I talk from an FMCG lens, I would actually say no, because somehow the FMCG basket, the buyers are able to expand it to the extent of what is absolutely necessary. I'll just give you an example to exemplify that. Last year, suddenly into the basket, we added things like sanitizers and hand wash, right? Now, these are, from a gram to gram perspective, hugely expensive in compared to what else is bought on a per gram basis. But as a result of that, did anything else suffer? None of the other things suffered. So to that extent, the FMCG basket is slightly elastic to be able to accommodate as long as there is a strong enough need. So therefore, a whole lot of the FMCG basket is non-discretionary. There is a small part that is discretionary, but a whole lot is not. So the non-discretionary part, I don't think will have anything significantly affecting it in terms of the ability to, reduce purchases as a result of price increases. The discretionary part also will not come down significantly, or has not come down significantly in this year, primarily because the discretionary spend itself is coming after a little bit of a lull in the last year. So all of these factors make me conclude that the price increases will happen. Yes, there will be a bit of a pinch, but the basket will not come down. There's just one more point I want to add about in this. One of the factors that we keep saying that the volumes are, the growths are muted. One thing to remember is that a very strong component of the FMCG basket is foods. Almost 80% is foods. And in that 80%, almost 27% is just wheat and atta, right? Now, in the last, starting from Q3 last year, various governments have been giving out free atta, free wheat to consumers. So that purchase is not reflected in the FMCG purchase. That mutes down the growth to some extent. Even with if you take the atta or wheat part of it out, FMCG still registered a growth. But yes, like to like, the growth is still lesser than last year, but there is still a growth that is fairly handsome.
No, that's true. Because those purchases that are not made when the government is supplementing those nutritional requirements. Mayank, your forward-looking idea. Now, I know a lot of companies are going to pass on price hikes, and beyond the FMCG sector, maybe discretionary spends will be muted. But do you think in your space you will continue to see this sustained buzz and perhaps a recovery in rural growth as well?
Yeah. So, as far as foods, as Ramki rightly pointed out, are non-discretionary, and we don't really expect impact on demand because of price hikes. There was one round of price hikes which happened about 3-4 months back in last quarter, and I think there would be one more in next quarter, or the current quarter. I'm talking about OND, October, November, December. So that I mean, considering the kind of input cost and the quantum of increase in input cost that we have seen compared to last year, especially key raw material like wheat flour, and sugar and edible oil. So given that, I think this is something that you will see going forward. Price hikes would be there. In fact, there was some resistance on part of most companies not to take price hike immediately and try and absorb as much as possible, or delay it as much as possible, so that you are not impacting the revival of demand. But given that the demand is robust, I think companies also are far more confident today of taking price hikes, and you will see price hikes happening across the board in most FMCG categories, including foods, in OND quarter.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you for that clear perspective. So the key takeaways, rural growth has moderated in some sectors, but a big reason for that is a higher base, because last year this time it was rural growth which was propelling the economy really, which was recovering from the first wave of COVID-19. Another factor which may have contributed to lower consumption in rural areas is that a lot of migrant workers may be now returning to the cities to work. So this is clearly a story in progress that we will continue to track. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Ramanna. Thank you.
Thank you.